Okay, so I was actually super disappointed when that statement came out from Malehya and there wasn't one from Daniel. Now, it makes sense. He's not going to write a statement. Malehya is trying to play the innocent, I want my children back act. Daniel is beyond that. So, yeah, I figured that there wasn't going to be a statement. But I was disappointed because I wanted to have a look at his handwriting. Now, when this geocache was found the other day, on one hand I thought, oh, cool, this is, a sample of Daniel's handwriting. But then I thought, well, okay, but this is 11 years ago. And this isn't really going to tell us much. And it's only like 2-3 lines of writing. So I almost didn't bother doing a handwriting analysis on it. But then I decided there wasn't anything to be lost from stopping and just taking a look at it. Just a quick glance to see if there was anything about it that stood out. I've just been sitting here writing notes and I've got pages and pages of notes on just these 3 lines of handwriting. And honestly, all I can say from when I actually look at it is any other females out there who may be considering that they want to have Daniel as a partner, just don't. Run now. This is not ideal partner material. So I'm going to break it all down for you. And it sounds like Amira is going to accompany me for the entire video. So I should probably let those people who are new to my channel know that snoring in the background is my chihuahua. She quite often does that. You've probably heard it before. It's been a while since I've explained it because I think most people are used to it by now. Okay, so let's start with having a look at this handwriting. The first thing that caught my eye was the fact that it is kind of crooked, it's kind of irregular. That can indicate someone who has abnormal behaviours in the bedroom, let's say. I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't think it's anything that any of us really want to delve into, really. Okay, the next thing I noticed was the letter K and the way that it is slightly larger, or possibly more than slightly larger, than the other middle zone letters. So you'll notice that it kind of takes over. When you get one of those, they're referred to as a go to hell K. In other words, it is usually indicating someone who is defiant and someone who resents authority. Yep, that fits. Now, like I said, I wouldn't have thought that looking at handwriting from 11 years ago was going to be overly revealing. But everything I look at is just like, okay. So, now the F, the letter F, when he writes the word left, it's kind of a figure of 8. It's not quite a full figure of 8, but it is a figure of 8 shape. That represents someone who's quite fluid with their thoughts, someone who is a quick thinker and can change their thoughts, move on and come up with the next thing that they were going to say pretty quickly. I guess that fits with someone who's good at, well, thinks they're good at making up stories. The other thing that I find really interesting about the F is when I first looked at it, I looked at it and went, that looks like a fishing hook. And it's not uncommon to see symbolism in people's writing, whether it is intentional or not. So the fact that his F resembles a fishing hook suggests someone who likes fishing. That just blew my mind when I saw that. Okay, moving on. Now, when you look at Daniel's letter I, when he's written it in his name, you can see the dot fairly clearly. In the lower line, when he's written nothing, it kind of gets caught up in the Q. But both those I's, both the dots, are kind of slashed. That tends to represent someone who can be irritable, someone who can be prone to anger, someone who might have a short fuse and a hot temper. Like I said, I found it a little bit surprising when I actually started looking at all this. Now, next we have the letters A in particular, and the G has a bit of a sharp shape to it too. When you have these letters that have a bit of a TP shape to them, that represents someone who can be stubborn and someone who can be controlling. Now, on top of having that TP shape to them, they also have a bit of a flamed look about them. At least the A's in Daniel's name do. These point to someone whose temper can flare up pretty quickly. Again, a little bit mind-blowing, a little bit concerning. Like I said, if you're a female and he's wanting to date you right now, I would run for the hills. Okay, moving on again. Okay, so another thing that stood out to me was the way that his handwriting shifts direction. That's always a red flag. This is suggestive of someone with mood swings, someone who does not have a stable mood. And then if we take a look at the upper zone in his writing, his capital letters, his number 2s when he's written 2012, even the top of the F, they're a little bit puffed up in comparison with his middle zone letters. They're somewhat more flamboyant. And this is representative of someone who likes to embellish the facts or someone who likes to brag. Again, rings a bell. So while we're talking about these puffed up letters and grandiose looking letters, the D and the M in Daniel Martell, you'll notice they pretty much slap you in the face because they stand out. They are oversized, they are in your face, they are loud. This is someone who has delusions of grandeur. Again, this actually fits. Okay, so trying to find a baseline in Daniel's writing is a bit of a challenge because there really isn't a baseline. Kind of goes all over the place, up and down. So, especially when you look at Martell, it's kind of a bit on the wavy side. This again points to emotional instability, and the way that the Martell goes up and then it dives down, that is representative of someone with a volatile personality. Again, run for the hills, ladies. Okay, the next thing I'm going to draw your attention to is the erratic pressure in his handwriting. So you've got some letters that are quite dark and heavy, and then you've got other letters, like when you look at the Q, that gets lighter as it goes up to the top, and the bottom of it is quite light. You have other letters like this, like that too. The G in nothing, that kind of pans out to nothing, literally. The R in quarter, the loop on the R gets lighter. You get a lot of differences here in his pressure with his writing. This, again, represents someone who just cannot control their emotional responses and their emotional urges. This is someone who is essentially a loose cannon emotionally. Now, what he wrote here is he was there on May the 3rd, 2014. He left a 2012 quarter and he took nothing. Daniel left nothing and he took something from that geocache. And I'm going to tell you how I can tell that. So if you look at his writing, you can see there are gaps in some of his words. Left, there's a gap between the F and the T. quarter. Again, you've got a gap between the Q and the rest of the word. Nothing. You could break it in half. You've got noth, N-O-T-H, and then I-N-G. You've got a gap between those two sections. Even took, the T looks a little bit isolated there off onto the left. When you see gaps in someone's writing, in someone's words, that is basically telling you that they are a liar. And the fact that the gaps are in the words that are talking about leaving a quarter and taking nothing says to me that he didn't leave a quarter and that there was something in that geocache that he decided he wanted and he took. And of course, the other interesting thing with this is when you get words that are smaller and tighter, that is also indicating a lie. And even though you have a gap in the word took and nothing, if you look at their construction, they are still tighter and they are still smaller than the other words. So again, he's lying about saying that he took nothing. He took something from that geocache. He didn't put anything in. And he's trying to make it look like he did. Okay, so the letters A and the O are referred to as communication letters. And you can learn a lot about someone from those letters. When we look at Daniel's A's and his O's, you can see that they all have gaps in them. Mostly at the top, although in May, the gap sort of goes down to the side, heading towards the bottom. And on the bottom line, when he's written took, the second O has a gap in the bottom. So what does that tell us about him? It says that he's someone who can't keep a secret, someone who is not trustworthy. And when you see a gap in the bottom, like with that O, for in the took, it means they're lying. Daniel's handwriting is telling you he is not someone to confide in because he will sell you out if it suits him. He is not someone who is trustworthy. If you tell him something and it's going to suit him to share that information with someone else, he's going to do so. And of course, the gap in the bottom of the O for the took, that tells you he's also a liar. That fits in with his statements when he's like, oh, well, yeah, I'm not sure if I meant to tell you, but I did pass the lie detector test. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to tell you, but yeah, Malehya did do her lie detector test too. Honestly, if RCMP wanted to leak information, they would do well just to give that information to Daniel and say, please do not tell anyone this information, this is a secret. And you can guarantee he's going to leak that. He'll probably go on the Turkey show and be like, well, I'm not supposed to say anything, but this is what the RCMP told me. But wait, there's more. This is mind-blowing. When I look at it, I'm like quite amused and also a little bit astonished. Like I said, I wasn't going to look at Daniel's handwriting here because it's 11 years ago and people's handwriting changes over time. But then when it comes to someone's base personality, leopards don't change their stripes. So now let's talk about the forked tongue stroke. If you have a look at the number 4, when he's written the date, it looks a bit like a forked tongue. That is another sign of a liar. And then we have stingers. These are like your Y in May, where it's a sharp point. You have the bottom of the Q is a sharp point, and his R's also have sharp points to them. These are representative of someone who they can have a somewhat piercing tongue. They don't care if they're going to hurt your feelings. They don't care if they're going to offend you. They will lash out and say things that are possibly shouldn't be said. Things that are possibly not so diplomatic. Things that may be critical or just downright rude. And while we're talking about these sharp letters, you also see a few shark's tooths through here. And that's where the strokes of the letter are slightly separated and they do form a bit of a shark's tooth. Again, you see it on the R's, and in the U in quarter, you can see that happening. It's that spike like a shark's tooth. Again, it's not a positive thing. It's representative of someone who is emotionally hungry, someone who is likely to lash out at people. I feel like everything I point out here is saying pretty much the same thing, which is rather disturbing. It's like he's just doubling down on it throughout. So let's talk about ambiguous letters. These are letters that if you were to look at them in isolation without the rest of the word, you may not be entirely certain of what the letter was. You may get words that look ambiguous. In this case, you just have the one letter that I can see that is ambiguous, and that is the A in May. Yeah, when you look at it as an entire word, then yeah, it looks like an A. But it is not well formed. It could be a G, a capital G. It could be who knows what else. It's definitely ambiguous. Again, that suggests someone who knows how to disguise the truth, how to be creative with the truth. Who would have thought that just a handful of words could be so revealing about a person's personality? And the crazy thing is, this is things that we know as well. Things that are being confirmed in his handwriting from 11 years ago. Now, let's address the clubbed letters. These are letters where there is thickness at the bottom of the letter. So you see this in a number of letters here. The bottom of the Y in May, in the bottom of the 4 in the 14. A lot of the L's have that heavier weight at the bottom. Some of them don't. Some of them have that funny quirk at the top, and I'm going to come back to that. And then, of course, the R in quarter, you can see that is quite clubbed. It starts with a heavy stroke, goes light, and it ends with a heavy stroke. Same with the K. That last stroke on the K is also quite a heavy stroke. It just ends hard. So what does it mean when you see these clubbed strokes in someone's handwriting? It means that there's someone who is likely to lash out, someone who is likely to strike first and think later. Again, this points to what we've heard about Daniel. And it's rather disturbing that this is all these years before whatever happened with Lily and Jack. I would love to be able to do a comparison, have a look at his handwriting from like today, this year. But this is telling us so much as it is. One thing that I do find reassuring is that when I look at this writing, there's nothing that stands out where I look at a letter and think, that letter looks like a weapon, or that letter looks like a noose. Because one thing that you will find with people who are responsible for taking the lives of other people, you can see their preferred weapons in their handwriting. This is something that blew my mind when I was reading the book by Michelle Dresbold. And she spoke about this in a chapter. And she showed the handwriting from Ted Bundy. She showed handwriting from several other well-known killers. and she said that she is able, with 100% accuracy, to say what their preferred weapon is. And she showed that in their handwriting. So I don't see anything in this handwriting that to me looks like a weapon. So that says to me that Daniel's not someone who's likely to pick up something and use it as a weapon. Touch wood. Okay, I think I touched on this. I'm doing this in 2 separate sessions. I started this last night and I'm finishing it now after breakfast. But the fact that his writing is somewhat erratic, that is suggestive of someone who is a bit unpredictable. Someone who's not entirely just, totally stable emotionally. Someone who's not stable in their mind in terms of, yes, they can be unpredictable. They can react without thinking, which is what we already saw in other areas of his handwriting. This handwriting that we're seeing here is like a big warning sign. It's like going to the zoo and seeing a sign, do not put your fingers through the bars. This lion will rip your hand off. Okay, so a few things in terms of the structure of the letters. Now, I mentioned earlier that when you see words that become smaller and scrunched up like took nothing, that's showing you, that's indicating a lie. But the other thing here is when you get changes in the size of letters throughout, that is indicative of someone whose moods fluctuate. And we do see that. Where he wrote left, those letters are much bigger than the letters in Daniel. And even in where he writes Martell, the letter sizes do vary. So you even have variations within individual words. If you look at took, the O's are 2 different sizes. Now, I already spoke about the irregular baseline with his letters. And what I've done here is I've actually drawn the baseline for you to see rather than follow the letters. Because not only does it show you the instability in terms of someone's emotions and moods, but the thing you need to pay attention to is when you have letters that drop below the baseline. So you might have an irregular baseline, but maybe all the letters stay above the baseline. So, for example, where he's written quarter, you still have this irregular baseline. The U drifts up above where the baseline is, but the other letters don't actually seem to drop below the baseline. However, when you do see letters dropping below the baseline, that's also a red flag. It basically shows that this is someone who ignores the rules of society. This is someone who hides behind a facade and they will create a ruse to conceal their motives. Well, that doesn't describe Daniel at all, does it? Not at all. I think the first time I analysed one of Daniel's interviews, the first thing I said was, this guy is masking. When you looked at his face in those early interviews, what you got was only micro expressions. This guy masks better than Chris Watts, which I find extremely disturbing. And, well, we've heard the many, many news stories that he's created in order to control the narrative when people have started focusing on him. Now, another thing that really stood out to me when I first looked at this is the way that when he wrote the D in Daniel, he went over that first stroke. That's not just done once, that's gone over. And of course, the fact that he's done it with his name is so telling. Because when you see this kind of thing in someone's writing, it means that they are someone who can be compulsive, someone who can be a little bit neurotic, and someone who may overindulge in things such as sex, drugs, or alcohol, doing this to basically alleviate built-up tension. Well, we know that Daniel gets issues with tension. It certainly sounds like he does have some anger issues. It sounds like he could be quick to snap. We've heard that he used to get angry with Jack. We know that the children had black eyes. We know that the children had other injuries. So yes, this is someone who would react quickly. But the rest of it says so much. You know, someone who overindulges in drugs and alcohol. Yeah, like someone who's currently doing Narcotics Anonymous and tries to say that he's just doing it to show that he's a good guy. But obviously you don't do that sort of thing unless there's an issue. And I'm willing to bet that this is something that is mandated in terms of him being able to have access to Meadow. Now, the terminology that I'm using here comes from Michelle Dresbolt. She is a highly regarded handwriting analyst. She's actually a statement and handwriting analyst. And a lot of what I am covering here is based on her work, her published work, her interviews, all that sort of thing. So the next one is, like I said, this is her words, but I love it. We're going to talk about the lurking lunatic stroke. This refers to a stroke in a letter that basically crosses the line. So if you look at the way that he wrote Daniel, with the E, that's your lurking lunatic stroke right there. The stroke on the E has gone straight back through the back of the letter. Now, technically, when you consider how it's written, it's the rest of the stroke that's gone through that initial E, the initial horizontal stroke, because that's where you start, and then it finishes with the loop at the bottom. But it's still gone through. That's your lurking lunatic stroke. What does that mean? That refers to someone who is a little bit stealthy, a little bit sneaky, and a little bit secretive. Well, does that mean like someone who maybe did 5 car trips overnight on Thursday or Friday, the 2nd of May, before reporting the children missing? Is that someone who is desperately trying to hide the truth about what happened to Lily and Jack? That could apply. Now, yes, when you have letters like the L and the T, you expect a bit of a straight line there. But for most people's handwriting, you are going to see a bit of a curve regardless. I think when I write Ds, sometimes if I'm starting the word, then it might be a pretty straight stroke. But for the most part, you can see a bit of a slant to my upright letters. You can see a bit of a curve to my upright letters. But what we're seeing here with the way Daniel writes his T's and his L's is these are straight lines. They don't bend at all. There's a few that bend a little bit, but a lot of those L's are dead straight. A lot of those T's are dead straight. This is someone who can be inflexible, someone who can hold a grudge, someone who's not likely to bend to other people's ways of seeing things. Someone who's not likely to compromise. Well, that tells us a lot because we've heard how controlling Daniel was in the relationship with Malehya. So that's no surprise to me either. Now, I am going to cover this when I do some more handwriting analysis on Malehya's handwriting. But this is something that applies definitely with Malehya's handwriting as well. People have said that they don't believe that Malehya wrote that statement because when she wrote her name, she left the A off the end. There's a few instances in Malehya's handwriting where there are missing letters. Now, in this writing, there is a missing letter as well. Daniel writes quarter without the R. Now, I would have to see more of his handwriting to really know what his level of literacy is. But just looking at it like this, what I can see is that there is a letter missing in the word quarter. This signifies someone who tends to skim over the truth, someone who likes to leave out important details in order to control the narrative. Wow, that doesn't apply to Daniel at all, does it? This guy never skims over the truth. He's been truthful from day one. We can look at all his statements and they all line up because of how truthful he's been. Not. So this is also quite telling. And not only that, because a lot of those strokes do drop below the baseline, signifying deceit, essentially, they're also showing aggression. So there's so much pointing in this handwriting to deceit, to aggression, to someone who is quick to respond, quick to react, and not in a positive way. Someone who likes to hide the truth or be creative with the truth. So I'm not quite finished yet though. Now, there are two things that I'm going to address at once here. One is the absence of punctuation, and the other is the way that when he writes his T's, the crossbar is quite firm. It's quite a heavy stroke for the most part. In quarter, not so much. It's a shorter stroke, but the other ones is quite a firm crossbar. So what does it mean when you have no punctuation? When you have these firm crossbars? Oh, and by the way, Amira doesn't spend all day snoring. For some reason, the moment I start talking, the moment I start working on a video, that's when she goes into this deep sleep, and all of a sudden you get the snoring. So what do these heavy crossbars and this lack of punctuation mean? This is someone who has a bit of a catch me if you can kind of attitude. They are determined, they have no limits, they have no restraint. They couldn't give a rat's ass about what their actions mean for other people. They are going to do it regardless. They are going to act the way they want to act regardless, and you're not going to stop them. That is a huge red flag. Certainly, if you are a woman looking at Daniel thinking, oh, I like him, I'd like to date him, just don't. This is a sign of someone who is coercive in their relationship and has to control everything. Someone who is not going to give an inch because basically it's all about them. They are going to act without hesitation. They're going to act without restraint. They have no limits. And they're certainly not going to listen to you when you say, please don't do that. And in fact, the way he writes his capital letters points to a similar thing. You'll notice there is some irregularity in terms of how he writes his capital letters. The capital M in May is quite different from the capital M in Martell. And of course, you have the irregularity in the D, where he's gone over the stroke, and it almost looks like he's done a really heavy downstroke with a few reruns, and then the D is more of a circle as opposed to being part of the stroke. So what does this mean? This is someone who is unpredictable. So yes, that does tie in with the lack of punctuation and with the heavy crossbars on the T's. This is someone who is unpredictable. That's another red flag, in my opinion. This again points to someone who is going to act without thinking. Someone who could potentially be volatile because they can't control their emotions. Now, I'm going to come back to the F. I spoke about how it resembles an upside-down fishhook, which I thought was somewhat interesting. But here's the other thing. When you look at someone's handwriting, F is important in terms of balance. So if you see an F that is nicely balanced, there's same amount above the line, same amount below the line, no excessive loops anywhere, that's good. That means they're organised, they're steady, they're settled. But when you see an F that is unbalanced like this does suggest someone who is not organised, someone who is not structured in their existence, someone who could be a little bit volatile. Again, this points towards Daniel Martell. Okay, I want to put Jack and Lily back up while I finish talking about this handwriting, because I'd rather look at them than Daniel's handwriting. This has been so revealing for me. Like I said, originally I glanced at it and went, it's 11 years old, it's not going to tell us anything. It's not significant. Turns out it is significant, because it's telling us Daniel's personality. Even 11 years ago, this guy was shady as. This is telling us that he was never going to be a good partner for anyone. He was certainly never going to be a good father for these children. He is certainly not someone that someone would want to be in a relationship with, because there's a lot of bad things that we see about him in his handwriting. And these things agree with what we've learned over the past 6 months about Daniel. When I started going over his handwriting, the number of inadvertent snorts or derisive ha moments that I had, there were quite a few, because I would look at something and go, oh my gosh, wow, that is so true. His handwriting reveals so much, and it confirms so much. He is someone who can be brutal with his language. He doesn't care if his words are going to hurt someone. He is someone who can be aggressive, who can be sneaky, who can be underhanded. He has no restraint. He's not exactly the most balanced individual. And perhaps most disturbing and perhaps most relevant in this case is the unpredictability. The fact that he can just snap without warning. That's what this handwriting is telling us. That's what this handwriting was telling us 11 years ago. Now, some people have questioned, did Daniel plant this, yada yada. I've had a look on a geocaching site, and I'm going to do a separate video on this. This geocache was actually planted by someone else. Not planted, it was put there by someone else. It appears that it may have washed down the river somewhat because it's not in the original location. But it is certainly not something that was planted by Daniel. In terms of the handwriting, I think some people have suggested that it's all his handwriting. If you actually apply handwriting analysis to the handwriting, you will see that there are completely different personalities being shown in the other samples of handwriting. They don't match Daniel's handwriting. But yeah, certainly this has been quite revealing. I had no idea when I finally decided to look at it how much I was going to see in this handwriting. And no, this is not a junk science. This is not me making it up as I go along. This is based on the work of a few people, but largely on the work of Michelle Dresbold. You can look her up. She is renowned. She trains people in statement and handwriting analysis. She does consultancy work for law enforcement agencies, and she does go in as an expert witness in court for cases based on her handwriting analysis. She's one of the best. So what I have said today is coming directly from her work. Anyway, I'm going to end it there. So thank you so much for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Yes, there will be more handwriting analysis coming up. I have done one previously of Malehya's handwriting, which I will link in the description for this video. And I will be doing additional handwriting analyses of Malehya's statement. There's still so much in there that I want to talk about. Of course, if you like what you see here, please hit the like button. That gets this video out there into the algorithm, and it gets more people seeing it. It gets Jack and Lily's story seen by more people. And of course, finally, please leave a comment below. I love reading your comments. I know I don't get to respond to all of them, but I do read them. So I appreciate your comments very, very much. So on that note, thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.